Your prefrontal cortex, the decision-making center sitting right behind your forehead, is losing synapses right now, not because of aging, not because of disease, because of neuroplasticity, the same mechanism every self-help guru on the internet tells you to hack. Hebbian learning, the neural principle behind fire together, wire together, does not care whether the pathway it strengthens leads to confidence or crippling anxiety. It wires both with equal force. And a peer-reviewed study published in the journal Brain through Oxford Academic made this explicit. Neuroplasticity is classified as maladaptive when brain connections produce negative consequences, including loss of function and increased injury. Millions of people are performing dopamine detoxes, repeating affirmations into bathroom mirrors, and forcing meditation routines with zero clinical guidance, believing they are upgrading their neural hardware. They are not. They are running an unlicensed surgery on the most complex organ in their body, and the most disturbing part is not what they are doing to themselves right now. It is what a specific mechanism in chronic stress does to the physical structure of their brain. A mechanism most of them will never learn about until the damage is entrenched. Start with your hand. Pick up a pen. Write your name. That motion, fluid, automatic, invisible, requires thousands of synaptic connections coordinated across motor cortex, cerebellum, and basal ganglia in fractions of a second. Now imagine those connections turning against you. That is exactly what happens in use-dependent dystonia, commonly known as writer's cramp. The NCBI's StatPearls medical reference describes it as a textbook case of maladaptive plasticity. The brain rewires its own sensory cortex in response to repetitive use, but instead of refining the skill, it produces aberrant, painful symptoms. The same entry lists phantom limb pain alongside it. Patients whose missing limbs generate signals of agony that have no physical source because the brain remapped the territory. Both conditions share one chilling feature: the brain did not malfunction. It adapted. It followed the exact same Hebbian principle the internet celebrates: neurons that fire together, wire together. But nobody tells you that the wiring does not come with a quality filter. The circuit that forms from repeating a traumatic thought is built with the same biological cement as the circuit formed by practicing piano. So what happens when someone under chronic psychological stress, work pressure, financial anxiety, relationship conflict, attempts to rewire their brain by forcing new thought patterns? They are not starting from a clean slate. They are laying new wiring on top of a cortex already destabilized by cortisol. A 2025 paper published through PubMed examined precisely this. Researchers found that chronic stress induces maladaptive neuroplastic changes in the prefrontal cortex, your brain's executive command center, synaptic weakening, dendritic retraction, meaning the tree-like branches of your neurons physically shrink, spine loss, impaired long-term potentiation, the very mechanism required for learning and memory formation. Read that again. The brain region responsible for impulse control, planning, and emotional regulation is being structurally degraded by sustained stress. And into this weakened landscape, people are injecting aggressive mental exercises with no professional guidance. But there is a problem with that neural mapping. If stress degrades the prefrontal cortex, the area that would oversee and direct any rewiring attempt, then who exactly is running the renovation? Nobody. That is the answer nobody wants to hear. When your prefrontal cortex is compromised by chronic cortisol exposure, the brain defaults to older, deeper systems. The amygdala, the habit centers in the basal ganglia. These systems do not innovate. They repeat. They automate. They entrench whatever loop is already running. This is where the self-help industry's favorite word, neuroplasticity, becomes a weapon aimed at the user. Consider chronic pain. A 2025 study in Nature's Experimental and Molecular Medicine journal investigated how the nervous system reorganizes itself in response to persistent pain. What they found should stop every just think positive advocate cold. The brain's plastic response to pain does not alleviate the suffering, it perpetuates it. The neural system rewires to amplify the signal, locking patients into a self-reinforcing loop of escalating agony. And then pain researchers found something that should not have been possible at this scale. The Australian Psychological Society reported that this maladaptive neuroplasticity, this central sensitization where the nervous system heightens its own pain processing, underlies worsening outcomes for essentially all types of chronic pain, not some. All. Your brain is not passively recording experience, it is actively remodeling itself around whatever signal is loudest. If that signal is anxiety from a forced affirmation that contradicts your actual beliefs, the brain does not resolve the contradiction, it wires the conflict deeper. Cognitive dissonance does not dissolve through repetition, it calcifies. The same applies to extreme dopamine restriction protocols. When you artificially suppress dopamine activity without clinical oversight, you are not resetting a receptor. You are training anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. The brain adapts to the deprivation, it down-regulates the very circuits you were trying to restore, except for one biological reaction no one could explain, until researchers looked at what happens when people try to change and then encounter stress. A study published through the NIH's PubMed Central examined older adults with coronary heart disease who had successfully initiated new physical activity routines. These were people who had done the work, changed the behavior, built the new pathway, and then stress arrived. The researchers found that under pressure, the patients reverted to their original inactivity patterns, not because of laziness or willpower failure, but because of maladaptive neuroplasticity. The older, deeper habit networks reasserted dominance over the newer, more fragile ones. This is the mechanism the self-help industry will never show you. The brain does not simply add new wiring and move on, it maintains a hierarchy of circuits, and the ones carved deepest by repetition, emotion, and stress hold priority. Your new morning routine, your journaling habit, your cold plunge. They sit on the surface of a neural landscape shaped by decades of prior conditioning. One sustained stressor and the architecture beneath reasserts itself. This is not a flaw. This is how neuroplasticity actually operates. The same mechanism that allows a stroke patient to relearn speech allows a trauma survivor's brain to replay the worst moment of their life with perfect fidelity thousands of times. The same Hebbian strengthening that makes a musician's fingers faster makes an anxious person's catastrophic thinking more automatic with every repetition. The difference between structural plasticity, the physical growth and pruning of synapses, and functional plasticity, the reassignment of tasks between brain regions, matters enormously. Children in critical developmental periods have both operating at full capacity. Adults have significantly reduced structural plasticity. You cannot brute force new architecture into an adult prefrontal cortex the way a 7-year-old's brain effortlessly absorbs a second language. So what actually works? The evidence points to one approach with consistent clinical support: graded, guided cognitive behavioral intervention, not affirmations, not detoxes. Structured protocols where a trained professional helps identify the specific maladaptive loop, introduces competing signals at calibrated intensity, and monitors for the exact kind of backfire that unguided rewiring produces. Slow, boring, supervised. The opposite of a hack. Your brain is changing shape while you process this sentence. The question was never whether neuroplasticity is real. The question is whether you are the one directing it, or whether the loudest signal in your environment, your stress, your fear, your desperate repetition of someone else's protocol, is directing it for you, and the signal you cannot hear is the one already wired in. The loops are running. The pathways are deepening. Every repetition is a vote for the circuit that wins. And next, we decode the conditioning protocol behind the habit you perform every single morning without knowing why.